All right. Welcome to the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by the CEO of Sumer Sports, Thomas Dimitroff. Thomas, Happy New Year for one. I know it's the third day of the new year. But welcome back. We're all kind of a little bit under the weather from, our great diets from the past few days, are getting slowly back to work, are super productive weeks of work between Christmas and New Year's, and the great week of football that was last week. How are you doing, man?
I'm good. What was one's favorite dish out in the Midwest during the holiday time, Eric?
Oh my gosh. Am I a bad person if my favorite dish was the chicken tikka masala that I had like just randomly last week when my parents weren't looking and my wife and I just went out and had that? Cause I love my mother. I love my father, obviously. I love my in-laws, of course. They don't watch the show, but my dad certainly does. Hi, Dad. I love you. I got to be honest. And my mom does. My mom cooks tremendously, but it's kind of I love Indian food, and I had that break I had to have Indian food during the middle of the week was honestly my favorite one. How about you, Thomas?
Well, it's interesting you say that. I was going to say you are a bad person, but I know how much you love your parents. You talk about it often, so how much you love them. So they should know and feel very, very well that you are representing well in the southern states here on behalf of the Eric Eager family. So anyway, I would say, look, we were traveling all over the place, and we were in Colorado, as you know, last time we were on, and we had a great time there. We usually have a great dinner at a place called Frasca. We had very few homemade dinners. My family wasn't there. It was just my kids and me. So I don't have to feel guilty by saying mine was a restaurant dinner, and it was at Frasca, downtown Boulder, Colorado. It was amazing French dinner, or actually it was Italian, Northern Italian, but they had this most amazing French wine collection. So anyway, you know me and my appreciation for some nice bottles of wine every once in a while. So it was good. Life was good. I'm back. But like you said, we're all kind of under it, but we're not, because today was a crazy kickoff to everyone being back in the office, sort of, as you know. And we have a lot on our plate. And without getting into a ton of that with everyone, because we don't want to bore, but suffice it to say, Sumer has got a lot of stuff going on, and we keep building, we keep growing with our head count, which is great from a CEO perspective. You'll appreciate it as well, because you continue to come to the table with needing people in your area of research and development, as Steve Santiago does, as Sean Clement does on the data side. We have a lot of people looking for a lot of people, and we keep growing here. What I will say to everyone, to me, it's great for the industry, because more and more NFL teams are interested, more NCAA teams are interested, Eric, and they all want to know, where are we going? How are we evolving here? I love that. It's exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm so thrilled with, a lot of what we've been able to do here also on the forward facing side. I was actually able to hang out with one of our data scientists, Ben Brown. We were able to go. Actually, it was fun because we went to a place called the Comedy Corner Underground in Minneapolis. We were watching the Vikings and Packers, as some of our people don't know this, but we're in the middle of building a lot of fantasy and betting models on the consumer side of Sumer, and we were kind of waiting for some of those models, for the results of those models to mature. And as people know, those finish in week 17 of the NFL season. And so we were waiting for those to mature as the season was progressing. And those, ended up, doing pretty well. And as those finished up, it was pretty nice to see those finish up, because it was nice to see some of the modeling work that we were doing finish on the positive side. And what we're really excited about for everybody is to sort of give some of that back to people. So one of the cool things that we're going to do, Thomas, is actually give some of that in for the playoffs to people. So I'm going to pull up a little bit of a snippet of what some of our great data scientists have been working on over the past little bit for our playoff preview here for the upcoming month or so. So this is a page from our playoff preview. You're actually going to get quotes from some lowly data scientists, but also a former NFL GM, Thomas Dimitroff, here on some of these NFL teams. So here's an example preview page from the AFC's 3 seed, the Kansas City Chiefs. You're going to get efficiency metrics. You're going to get pass rates over expected. You're going to get personnel usage data. You're also going to get narrative-driven statistics as well on everything. But this is just a little bit of a preview. If you are subscribed, so sumersports.com/subscribe, you are going to get access to this playoff preview. It is going to be free for everybody who signs up for our newsletter for the playoffs. And you're going to get the probability of your favorite team making the Super Bowl, winning each round of the playoffs, as well as various little tidbits as far as, how your teams have done and everything like that. We plan on having a preview, packet like that for every single sort of cornerstone event in the NFL calendar from now on. So draft, free agency, fantasy football, and everything, including, and we are planning as well to have one for the Super Bowl. So whoever makes the Super Bowl, we are going to have one as well for that. So this is going to be, and it's going to be free of charge for this particular playoff. So just look forward to that. Just our token of appreciation for you guys following along on sumersports.com, following on this podcast, the Sumer Sports Show, as well as Stats and Steams, the podcast with Tej Chef and Sean Side. So we really appreciate that. And again, we've been working incredibly hard behind the scenes. We've had a very successful year here at Sumer. Some of that you guys have seen, some of it you have not seen, but it has been a really cool year at Sumer. And obviously the leadership of you, Jack Jones, our founder, Paul Tudor Jones as well, has been really instrumental. It's a tremendous place to work. So I'm incredibly thrilled to be able to say that and be able to continue into 2024. And we're really thrilled to give you guys, the consumer, an opportunity to share in that with us.
And Eric, with all that said, for those of us, as you know, and you've said this many times, we don't actively gamble outside of Sumer here. That's not our mode at this point. But there's a lot of data and a lot of information within our website that is utilized by some of your friends and my friends who are strongly into that world, right? So if I were to be recommended to some of my close buddies up in Canada and Toronto who are wildly into the playoff scene and going into the Super Bowl, is this where I recommend they go? Do they go to this playoff piece?
Yep.
To dig in, to be edified by
absolutely. And I was just on a show that I do weekly with my friends at the Hammer Betting Network, which is founded by my friend Rob Bizzola, who's out of Toronto. And we actually pull up the league page, which I'll actually go to right now, because he was talking about using the league page because there was some value there vis-a-vis the San Francisco 49ers, who are near and dear, of course, to our heart as well. But looking at these probabilities, this is exactly where you would want to go, Thomas, to look and see, who has obviously the strongest odds. Thomas, you want to know something really funny, though, as we approach the tail end of this season. One thing that's really funny, Thomas, is if you look at the Super Bowl odds, obviously you have San Francisco, Baltimore. Those teams have already secured buys, as you can see, 100% having buys. The fifth most likely team to win the Super Bowl right now, the Buffalo Bills, if they lose on Sunday to the Miami Dolphins and the Steelers win, and I believe there's one other team that wins, it's escaping me right now, but the Bills could miss the playoffs with a loss and a couple other teams winning on Sunday and Saturday. So they could go from the fifth most likely team to win the Super Bowl to out of the playoffs, which is obviously a crazy outcome. So this has been an unreal season from that perspective so far this season. I believe Pittsburgh has to win this weekend, as well as I believe it's I believe Houston and some other team. I think even Indianapolis or somebody. I have to go through the permutations myself. But that's an incredible set of outcomes. Buffalo has truly been, and Beat Gamer said the Jags have to win as well. So that's an incredible incredible turn of events for a great franchise.
Let me ask you this.
Gamer has the set of outcomes. The Jags win, the Steelers win, the Buffalo loses, and the Bills go from the 5th most likely team to win the Super Bowl to out of the playoffs.
Can you go back to that, Doc, for a second? That page. Let's just dig to the bottom here. Only elephant in the city here, just because I'm in Atlanta. I've been so intrigued by what's happened in this division, as challenged as it was this year. I specifically and semantically responsibly use that word challenge versus another word. Can you tell me where they are? Where is Atlanta with relationship to Jacksonville and Tampa right now, as far as their where we're going as far as playoff opportunities?
Yeah, so here are the Falcons right here. They are, if you look at ELO, which is our power rating, the Atlanta Falcons right now are the 22nd best team in the NFL per our ELO rating system. Okay. They are projected to win 7, so they have a 30% chance to win against New Orleans in New Orleans this week. Mm-hmm. They have a 9.6% chance to make the playoffs, a 9.6%, so they only can win the division. 9.6% chance to win the division. A 1 in 1,000 chance to win the NFC. So they get in, they could run the table. We basically give them no chance to win the Super Bowl. I think that the most disheartening thing, and just, speaking freely here, they've had the easiest schedule this year, Thomas. Mm-hmm. New Orleans has had the second easiest. Now, this is a thing. Your guys, now this is in contrast, of course. Houston and Indianapolis have had this 3rd and 4th easiest schedules. They've capitalized on them. They both have 9 wins. Mm-hmm. New Orleans and Atlanta have 7 and 8 wins. Now, again, the Falcons and the Saints have had the 2 easiest schedules. Now, the one thing that's very interesting, Thomas, is Tampa Bay, who is currently the favorite at 70% to win the division. Mm-hmm. All they have to do is beat Carolina. They've actually had an above average difficult schedule to do so.
I see.
Tampa Bay has, before this run, has never won back-to-back division titles. They're going for their 3rd consecutive NFC South title.
We lose track of that sometimes because of, they have a quarterback there this year, and what, we went round and round about it. There's, in my mind, I was thinking, that's a tough rebuild year. And he's a competitor, right? We do know that. And so I'm thanks for showing me that, only because I'm really interested to see, Arthur's got a lot, Arthur Smith, of course, he's got a lot on his lap here going into this final game, right? This is a big game, which probably leads into discussion about hot seats and Black Mondays. I don't know if you want to talk about that and dig in. We're 3:36 in. I don't know. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. I think, and Beat Gamer has the right phrase. Atlanta needs to beat the Saints, and they need the Bucks to lose to Carolina. Now, a lot of bettors, if we talk about gambling, a lot of bettors have bet the Panthers this week, because the Panthers, have been, now they got shut out by the Jags the other day with a backup quarterback, but there have been people that have bet that. So they're not out of it. The Falcons can pick 8th, or they can make the playoffs. So it's a weird range of outcomes.
But the good thing is there's no one sitting their players in this one. Tampa needs to win and New Orleans needs to win, right? And, as far as wanting to get there, and of course Atlanta does, if they have any hope at all of the 9% that you're talking about. So This isn't one of those situations where a team gets in because someone sat their starters.
Correct. Yeah. So everybody's playing, which is fun. And I think that's, of course, when you think about, some teams, I don't think, like, for example, it is funny, and we'll talk about Black Monday in a second, but when Beat Gamer talks about Jags, Steelers, Buffalo, it is different, though. If you're the Ravens playing Saturday against the Steelers, you actually want to sit all your players, because one of your biggest threats in the playoffs could be Buffalo. And one of the biggest things is, if you let the Steelers get in the playoffs, it could be at the expense of the Bills. And so you could want to lose to get the Steelers in to keep Buffalo out. So there's some gamesmanship there. There's no such gamesmanship on the NFC side for the Falcons, Bucks, and Saints in that regard. So that's kind of interesting. But it is the Black Monday thing's interesting, right? Because I think that there are with that regard, right? Like when you think of Saints, when you think of Falcons, there's probably some outcomes this weekend that could prevent the teams moving on from coach and GM. And then there's some outcomes that could exacerbate those things, right? Like I think that there are some situations, like if you look at the Jets, for example, they've obviously given a vote of confidence to Robert Saleh and Joe Douglas, but that hasn't always carried water. You know, we saw a couple years ago with Joe Judge where the Giants gave a vote of confidence to Joe Judge with a month to go, and that didn't carry water the whole time. And so, like, there's probably, when you think about New England and the Jets, that is the only game, Thomas, of the whole weekend that literally has nothing riding on it. Yep. But there's a ton riding on it, right? Because if the Jets go out there and get blown out by 50, who knows what happens, right? Or when you think about Jets, Patriots, that could be the last game in the history of Bill Belichick coaching the Patriots. Who knows?
Well, crazy. Can I just add, just as a segue into this conversation, because it's a really important conversation for everyone to understand. No one, mostly in the public and media, have hard feelings for GMs and head coaches who, as you know, are probably, making, a lot more money than anyone cares for them to be making. So there's not a lot of hard feelings about it. So you have a head coach and a GM who are used to hot seats, right? This is what's important. Hot seats happen every year or every other year. Anyone short of winning a Super Bowl, there's always some element of heat on your seat going into the next year. Whether it's with the owner who's a little agitated with you because your acquisitions didn't work out, or if you're a coach, you weren't play calling right, or you weren't minding your time right, et cetera, you weren't developing right. There's always reasons. The hotness we signed up for. What we didn't necessarily sign up for, in my opinion, is the Black Monday occurrence. We know that it'll inevitably happen. To use a line from my former co-worker / I wouldn't call Rich my boss necessarily because I answered to Arthur Blank, but Rich McKay, he has always said in the NFL, it never ends well. Remember that, Rich. You shared that with me. Remember it wherever you are in your career, any of us, that it never ends well. So that Black Monday thing is real. And so when you're going into this final week and you know that your seat has been hot, legitimately hot, where you're one of the 3, 4, or 5 people considered losing their jobs, sometimes it happens, sometimes you pull through, and sometimes it doesn't. There are teams out there right now that know. There are teams that have already experienced it. Tom Telesco, right? And Brandon Staley out in Los Angeles. They've experienced it. There's other ones that are waiting for the end of the season. This is a tough time. This is one that I don't think you can train for unless you're in your second stint as a head coach or second stint as a GM. This is one that I really want to talk about. This is one where we start talking about names and they're tough to hear, and you're a family and you're with your kids by the TV at night, or your kids are coming home from school and their buddies at school, and people that aren't even their buddies, probably even worse, are throwing digs at your father and how bad he is at doing what he's doing. This is where it becomes a lot more empathic, right? And you kind of get it more. You don't feel bad for them, because I will only say this because I've been through it now. I had never been fired before in my life until 3 years ago. And, you're kind of thinking, okay, maybe I'll escape that. And it just inevitably doesn't happen. But you do have a little bit of coldness to you on the other side of getting fired and going through that process. It's almost like a mature thing where you're telling your kids, calm down. We all go through this, right? So as coaches and GMs, you all go through it. So you're a little less emotional about it as the years go on. I'll lead in with that.
Yeah, it's so funny because it's crazy because I've never been fired from a job in my life, and yet I sort of you get to a certain point in your life, and obviously you've been a GM of an NFL team, and when you're in that rarefied air, you are always sort of it's kind of the Peter, you're promoted to a spot where it's a hard job, right? You're always sort of in that, like, you're always sort of in that spot where people are second guessing you, and people are always sort of like challenging you and wondering. And I like, it's funny. I don't think I've ever told you this, but like, I was in the line kind of in Buckhead over here at the taco shop, and somebody came up to me and said, like, and I was just like ordering a taco, and somebody came up to me like, hey, and I was just like ordering, and somebody must have recognized my voice. I'm loud. My voice is loud, as you know, and that's why we have this. That's why we have this here, like levity here, right? And somebody came up to me, he's like, I really wish we didn't fire Thomas. And I like, and I'm sitting here and I'm like, so imagine the degrees of separation. Not you. They didn't go up to you. And I know this has probably happened to you, and you won't say it because you're very humble and stuff. They came up to me, who they know works with you. And like, but like, of course, this person 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when they're frustrated about their favorite team struggling, probably wanted you fired, probably was MFing you to their best friends and stuff.
Yeah.
Has a little bit of, takes a deep breath, realizes your humanity, realizes all this stuff, and now goes to me, probably wouldn't even say it to your face, but says it to my face, right? And it's funny, isn't it? Like, this whole thing, and I guarantee you, there's probably one of these GMs that gets fired Monday, for whom 3 years from now,
yes,
they're going to go up to their son or their next colleague or whatever, and they're going to be like, geez, I probably shouldn't have fired Joe Douglas, or you know what I'm saying? And like, and that's the way it goes, right? Because there's a team that's struggling right now, and we talked about this last week. Like, Antonio Pierce is showing maybe the Raiders were wrong to fire Dave Ziegler, right? Because maybe that wasn't the reason that the Raiders were struggling. And it's so funny because you're right. Like, NFL teams go up and down for reasons that are hard to discern. And we're going to look on Monday and we're going to point fingers, and it's going to be for reasons that aren't all that easy to diagnose. And I think that that's an important thing to talk about right now before it actually happens.
Yeah, I mean, look, there are so many funny stories and quirky stories that you can bring up. I was actually speaking very quickly, and those of you who listen from the Atlanta area, there's a guy named Zach Klein who's a good dude in town. He's a longtime TV personnel, styling guy from down in Florida somewhere, but he's up here, and he texted me and he was saying different things. I said, "Wow, you've become quite forgiving in your old age," and he's probably only 48. But he said, "Are you kidding me?" He started calling me dumbass, and you guys probably smoke way too much weed out in Colorado. I'm like, no, I actually don't, because I don't. That's something I like ever on my lungs. But we were joking about it, and he said, well, don't you remember the letter I wrote? It was an op-ed to the city of Atlanta or whatever back in 16. I'll find it for you. And I'm like, oh my God, Zach, I'm so sorry. I can't believe I've forgotten that already. He said, quite honestly, like, I've never gone out on a line for someone like that before. And he did. The point is, he's not a homer. He's definitely got a critical side, but he speaks his mind, and I respect him for that. Point is, sometimes you have fan base behind you, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you have media way behind you, and other times you have media who, every time they get a chance to get on, they're slamming you as a GM because you don't know your rear from the hole in the ground. And that's something that anyone, and I used to say to people in town, even some of my adversary, like the media people, and I got along with most of them, but the ones that we were at loggerheads on, I would say, all you need to do is move your ass from Atlanta for a minute and spend some time in Chicago, New York, or wherever it is, and realize this is not an exact science. And you guys think that you have it so good here, or other teams do, and everywhere the local media is complicated. It's a very different thing than the national media. And a lot of times the local media get pissed off because personalities that are in our jobs, Eric, I'm talking about as GMs and head coaches, tend to relate well and get along well with the national media. And people think they're doing that the local media think they're doing that just to get out and have voice, in the world. And the reality is, because the local media is so much more critical, that's their job. And I have some great local media friends, great. And we joke about this, but they have to be critical of their locals. for us to interact on the media side, it's so much easier to go out in the national because they're not as critical. They're not as jarring as close to town. That's another tidbit.
Yeah. And there have been, I mean, we're very much on this show. And I think, it's it's a fine line. And I think like, my favorite comedian, Anthony Jeselnik, like once said, like, art is getting away with it. Like that's there's an element of being able to be critical without ruining relationships. And that is an important part of being a part of the media. And I remember one of my first years of Pro Football Focus, I was doing a report for an NFL team. And I was much more critical on my old show, the PFF Forecast, than I am on this show. And I think that at the time it was probably the right tone to take. And I think that we take the proper tone on this show for the time that we're in. And I remember when I finished, the guy wrote back and it said, "Hey, by the way, I really like your show." And I said, I'm like, I'm actually surprised by that. I'm like, I'm very critical of your team. And he goes, "Yeah, but you're right about our team." And I'm like, "Oh," and he's like, he's like, "Not everybody in our building agrees with everything we do." And it's sometimes, and I think that so I think that it's important to tell the truth. And I think it's important to, and so all this is to say, it's important to tell the stories, and it's important to have an ecosystem where the truth is told. It's important to have perspectives, and sometimes you have to hold back, and sometimes you have to let the truth out. And we've been told by certain people at times that what we said wasn't necessarily flattering, and we've been told sometimes that maybe we concealed too much and so forth. But it's important, obviously, for us to do what we think is right at all times. And to that point, right now there is an NFL team for whom many people thought was going in the wrong direction that has turned it around, that is going to keep their jobs, and that is the Chicago Bears, Thomas. Right, and let's talk about them.
Yeah, no, that's right. Keep going.
Matt Eberflus, Ryan Poles, who just a few weeks ago, you remember when they were playing the Los Angeles Chargers in LA, there was the picture of Ryan Poles sitting under the GM label, right, looking, not particularly happy. There was Kevin Warren, right? They were painting to him the whole time. That team now, I believe 7-9 now, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 7-9. They are going to take on the 8-8 Green Bay Packers this week. They're 3-point underdogs in Lambeau Field. 16 weeks ago, they were beaten soundly by the Packers at home. Justin Fields did not look particularly good. The defense did not look great. They made a trade for Montez Sweat midseason that your former colleague Mike Lombardi said was, quote, one of the stupidest trades that a team could ever make. Montez Sweat is now like one of the best pass rushers in football, one of the best edge players in football. They're pretty much safe now. And yet they face a really hard decision now about Justin Fields and what to do with the number 1 pick. Mm-hmm. I believe now this is one of the most envious positions in all of football. What do you do if you're the Chicago Bears, Thomas?
I mean, can you imagine the feeling, though, that if you really deemed it necessary to move on from Justin Fields and the quarterback that you currently have, that you have all opportunities in front of you, and then you have, of course, massive opportunities to trade back. But what an amazingly powerful feeling that has to be to Ryan Poles. Kudos to him after taking a lot of heat for 2 years or 2.5 years, right? This is a place you want to be in. Because my feeling is there are 3 or 4 or 5 quarterbacks in this group that are really, really interesting at a lot of levels, right? And that's a great place to be. So I what do? You contemplate up and down, and you barter and wheel and deal like a crazy man on one side. It's almost like you have 2 different departments. You have that trade focused department, and then you have the other department, right? The trade focus meaning we're going to trade and we're out hunting like crazy to make sure we get the right quarterback. And then the keep department is how are we going to build around Justin to make him the best that he can be. And those are 2 really admirable spots to be in for a general manager and Matt Eberflus as well, right? As a coach that's going to be, retained after. I mean, it was upside down, as we know, a month, 2 months ago, whenever it was.
Well, yeah, and it's so funny, right? Because I look at the NFC North, and I know that's when you look at the NFC North, in like 3 years, is this going to be the best division in the whole league? Because, and they've done it with 4 different approaches, right? Like the Lions, because this was like Brad Holmes, right? And that was, the GM cycle, back in 2021. Brad Holmes basically tore it down from the studs, right? He basically rebuilt. They brought Goff in, but like they basically rebuilt from zero. And now they're atop. They won the division or whatever, but they basically rebuilt from zero, but they brought in a veteran. Yeah. The Packers basically rebuilt, like they had a competitive rebuild with a young quarterback. The Vikings had a competitive rebuild with a veteran quarterback, Cousins. And then the Bears had a complete rebuild with a young quarterback. And they're all kind of they're all kind of percolating in this kind of competitiveness. The Vikings won 13 games last year. The Bears are kind of competitive now. The Packers are kind of like, I feel like the NFC North is kind of this case study in different ways to rebuild a roster. It's kind of fun to kind of look at that.
Yeah, it's fun to look at it. And I mean, yes, keep going on that thought. Sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, no, I think so, because there's all these questions, because like when Poles took over the Bears and Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah took over the Vikings, I think that there were these competing worldviews of like what to do. And the Vikings, decided to be a competitive rebuild team and keep Cousins around and kind of keep Harrison Smith and keep kind of like some competitive elements to it. And they won a bunch of games last year, and everybody's like, oh, that was the right choice. But now you look, and they got their asses kicked on New Year's Eve, and now they're 7-9, and it's kind of like you look at that roster and you're like, like they're probably in kind of the worst position of any team in that division. They're not in a horrible but they're kind of in last place now. But they're not in terrible position, right? Mm-hmm. And you look at the Bears, and everybody's like, the Bears have been terrible, not very good for the last 2 years. But they're now in a better position than the Vikings in a lot of ways. And so, but they went to they almost flirted with losing their jobs to get there. And so I think like when you look at those two teams kind of started in the same place, right? GM, head coach, it's an interesting thing. Do you like Adolfo-Mensah and O'Connell have never been in jeopardy of losing their jobs, but now they may be in a worse position than the Bears were. Whereas Poles and Eberflus, they were being talked about as being in jeopardy of losing their jobs, but now they may be in a better place. And so it's a question of like, if you had your druthers, which one would you do, right? It's a good question.
Well, it's a good question. And while we're on that line, it's a great question. And I love the concept here. If you're looking right now, along with Chicago, who else literally were on their way to being very, very hot and potentially being, dealing with Black Monday? Do you think the Packers were close to that? What other groups out there besides the ones that are possibly going to, experience Black Monday in a negative way? Who else saved their jobs? Basically, let's twist it that way tonight. That's probably a good place to be, because we'll be talking about Black Monday down the road. But who else saved their jobs? Who else was a little too hot for their liking?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it, because now we can sort of, that's a great way to spin it. I think Green Bay for sure. It would have been hard to fire LaFleur just 2 years removed from 3 straight 13-win seasons, but it's a tough league, as you know, right? Like Kevin Stefanski probably saved his job this year, right? Like the Browns, if they miss the playoff 3 straight years, that's probably not great for him. Do you think this sounds crazy, but do you think Sean McVay saved his job this year?
No, I don't think he saved his job this year, but I love the fact that he's just got everyone rejuvenated there, and I think it's great for him. And I
think Sean McVay is the coach of the year. I don't think he'll win it, but that's the most impressive coaching job this year, don't you think?
Yeah. Categorically, to me, the way that he handled everything, and I'm a huge fan of his. He is one of those guys out there, one of maybe two or three that I would think if I were to ever go back in that I would trade for as a general manager to be as my head coach, because I have a great deal of respect for him, on so many levels. So
I think the energy, there is I think the energy there is infectious. I think from a front office perspective, Nick Caserio went from kind of, I mean, you trade for Will Anderson, CJ Stroud. I think Houston winning 9 games this year, like Nick Caserio was kind of on the boundary, but I think Nick Caserio is firmly safe in Houston now after a very impressive year. Will Anderson, CJ Stroud, a very good draft class, a very good roster, frankly, that people aren't talking about. I think Tampa Bay very much has had a very good year, especially given all the dead money there. Yep. Yeah, those are the ones that I think stand out to me. I mean, those are people, in my opinion, that have really risen their stock this year.
Yeah, I think you hit them for sure. And I think, I agree with you on Nick. I mean, Nick Caserio and what he did, that was a tough situation in the offseason. There was all kinds of banter and discussion about him leaving of his own volition or team volition. Who knows what it was? He hung tight. He went after what he believed in, and here they are dealing with a lot of positives. Look, you and I both know that doesn't mean the organization's turned around like that. That's not how it always goes. Detroit's situation is a little bit an anomaly over the years, right? They don't just like turn it around like that and never go back to being challenged. So I guess, yeah.
Beat Gamer has an interesting one, by the way. One of our very loyal listeners, McDermott's interesting. I think that the turnaround, if they don't win this weekend and then don't make the playoffs, you could possibly see a situation like that. But I think that the Buffalo Bills are a pretty loyal franchise. And so I think when you think about 3 straight division titles after you hadn't won one since 1997 or 96, if I'm not mistaken, I think McDermott stays, and I think he deserves to. I know the whole like Al-Qaeda thing that he talked about was a little weird and everything, but I think he's been a tremendous coach for them for a long time. Brandon Beane, of course, has been a really good GM, has pushed a lot of good buttons. I mean, Thomas, Rasul Douglas, that's one of the really good midseason trades a coach has made or a GM has made in the last decade in the NFL. He had 2 interceptions the other day, including a touchdown. I think the Bills, even if they don't make the playoffs, have saved their jobs this year.
Look, I think Pagula and company and Brandon Beane, no question, they talk about their business together. I'm talking about mom and pop, right? I'm talking about husband and wife there as far as the Pagulas, who will talk to Brandon Beane, who is one of the better in the league right now and highly respected. They understand good football people and they understand people. So all due respect to Beat Gamer, they're not that easy to come by. Those coaches that are sound, quality on and off the field, quality on organization, being able to manage and run the team as well as work in consult with Brandon Beane, because a head coach and a GM have to work side by on a lot of things. And I think he's not one that just comes along every day. It's been tough. Of course, there have been some tough situations. And if they miss the playoffs, I just don't see that being the case for him at this juncture. You know what I'm saying? If that fell by the wayside there, given your stats, I think the Pagulas would be very upset. And I think Sean would probably be even more upset than anyone.
Yeah.
So I don't see that at this point respectfully.
Yeah. Beat Gamer brings up some interesting, like a good point, the Von Miller contract. Like I do think like there were mistakes made. I think the Stephon Diggs thing has been weird, right? Like ever since Joe Brady's taken over as OC, Stephon Diggs has been kind of out of whack. As the Sumer Sports fantasy teams can attest, he has not done much since the offensive coordinator change, but that team has dealt with a lot of injuries. Matt Milano has been hurt the whole, for a lot of the year, et cetera. Like it's been rough, for sure. But if they can resolve them, if they can win the division, it's going to be one of the they're going to be a dangerous football team, obviously, in that conference, which will be really fun. Let's talk one last thing, because I want to, and I know you only skimmed this game, and I was driving back. My wife and I, we took our kids and our cat. It was like the Noah's Ark. We had 2 dogs, a cat, all the way from Minnesota to Atlanta. We stopped in Nashville 2 nights ago. But I was watching the Washington versus Texas game. I was watching Penix Jr. It's everybody wants to say Penix, but it's Penix. I was watching Penix. That's an impressive quarterback. And I understand he's older. I understand he's got the ACLs and all this stuff. But my God, he's a good player. And I noticed this thing because we talked about it on this show a while back. He only takes a sack on less than 7% of his pressure drop. Not 7% of dropbacks, but when he is pressured, he only takes a sack 7% of dropbacks. Caleb Williams, Drake May, all great prospects. Sam Howell, was 25% in college. Drake May, Caleb Williams are closer to 20%. 7% is insane, Thomas. I think that Penix, even if he's got the issues of being older and all this kind of stuff, I think that's a good prospect. What do you think? What in your time watching him, what do you think of him as a prospect?
No, look, I think he's a very good prospect. I think he has the ability to know when to hold and fold him ideas. I think his decision making, his ability to make sure that he doesn't put himself in that spot to be sacked, right? And to take the sacks, to your point, to, sometimes the guys who have the feet about them are a lot quicker to want to bail and jump around and move around, right? I think he knows where his limitations are. I mean, there was a mention there by a former football player. I think it was Michael Irvin, wasn't it? I think it was Michael, who made a comment that Michael Penix, not Penix, but Penix, was literally like Michael Vick. And I was on my heels thinking, Michael, like, you're such a good football person. You know so much about players and athleticism and movement, et cetera, et cetera. I'm really surprised that he paralleled Michael Penix with Michael Vick, because they're a different athlete. They're a different scramble. They're a different avoid. They're a different athletic throw guy, at least in my mind. So back to your question, I like Michael Penix a lot. I think it's going to be interesting to see where he goes and who he goes ahead of. That's what I'm really interested in. Will he slot ahead?
Zach has some good points here. So he has a great O-line and paces Pac-12 defense. That's his career rate, is what I gave, not his Washington 2023. That's his career. So that's including Indiana, the Big 10. And so that's everything. And the reason I do pressure to sack is because I want to mod out by pressures. I don't want to say, oh, this is his sack rate, because I understand that some guys get better environments. I want to say, when he's pressured, what does he do? Because I understand some guys get pressured more. And that's why I do pressure to sack, because I don't want to give some guys credit for playing behind better O-lines. And so, and granted, like, and I always thought that he didn't have that great of an arm, because I'm not a scout, and I don't. And when I'm sitting there with you guys like Mike May, I'm amazed. It's so crazy. I watch you guys watch football, and I'm like, shit, I don't know anywhere close to what you guys know. But like, I'm watching him, and I thought, like, and this is why I always like have empathy for Michael Irvin there, because when you watch a left-handed black quarterback, you're like, oh, Vic, like, I get that. So I always like went to Tua because he's a left-handed African-American quarterback, or Tua's Hawaiian. I'm like always like, oh, I thought he was kind of like Tua, where he's kind of got a little bit of a weaker arm. And no, his arm is phenomenal. Like, and so, but like, that's where, again, where I'm so impressed by scouts, because you guys weed through all of the biases that like normal people who watch football have, right? Like, where, somebody watches a white wide receiver and like, oh, that's Jordy Nelson, some stupid stuff like that, right? And like, that's, I think, unfortunately, where a lot of people go when they're scouting football. And that's where a scout, like, you literally are trained against all those biases. And unfortunately, Michael Irvin, went straight to the left-handed African-American quarterback when scouting Michael Penix.
A little aside and a funny aside, and take it the right way, which I know you will. You said you're amazed at when you sat around with us in our first scouting meetings, first Sumer scouting meetings, by the way, really excited, proud of them, of course. And you were very, intrigued and admired the knowledge in that room and the football knowledge. It's the same way with us looking at someone, you with a big brain who's an expert on blueberry insemination or whatever your dissertation was on. And I think it's amazing because we realize not only are you outrageously smart as it comes to your dissertation in mathematics of plants, and then you also have I think, an uncanny combination of brain and understanding of data and math and football because you played. Doesn't matter. I mean, the pros wouldn't claim you as a player, wouldn't claim me as a player. Remember, I had Danny Ferry tell me in town that I was like the worst athlete he's ever been on the golf course with. And I had to remember that he came out I think he was a first or second overall in the NBA draft. So my point on all of this is you have a really good understanding. And so when we sit in there and listen to you talk about data, at least the open-minded of our group are fascinated by what you have to share and how they could learn and grow. Right. So I think that is funny. Please don't take the blueberry comment as
no, but it's good though. And it's like the thing about, and we've dealt with this, right? Like, and our founder, right, Paul Tudor Jones, incredibly successful in one walk of life. And there's a curiosity that I think is incredible there. And, and that's refreshing, right? Like when people, and this was always something in academia that always tilted me, which was, and it's partially this too, like I was interdisciplinary. I was math and I was biology. And there was the first time that I ever I proved a theorem about this biological system. But to get it published, I needed to write the paper with a biologist. So I waltzed into this woman named Diana Pilson's office. I was like, hey, I've proved a theorem about your system. And she's like, well, that's actually not how it works. And so of course, I'm 23 years old and I'm talking to a 60-year-old woman about something she studied for 40 years. And she shoots me down. You have that happen to you a few times and you're not going to talk to Mike Mayock like you understand left guards. You know what I mean? You've had that experience. And now granted, being embarrassed in front of Diana Pilson, who hopefully, I think she doesn't listen to the show, but being professor of biology at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln is far less embarrassing than being told you're an idiot by Mike Mayock, Thomas Dimitroff, somebody like that. So I have experience of making an ass of myself. And that helps to not make an ass of yourself in the future. That's it. And if I were to give advice to people, those are having low stakes failures like that are incredibly good. Right. So that's a lot of times, when people make mistakes in life, it's because you're an expert in one area and you think immediately that makes you an expert in other areas. And that was always something that, when you have, when I was, math, everybody's like, oh, this person's a PhD. That means they're very smart. It's well, no, actually it means they're very smart at one thing. It means they have the aptitude eventually to be very smart at something else, but it takes a ton of time, right? It takes a ton of time and effort. It takes the 10,000 hours or whatever. And I know, people scoff at Malcolm Gladwell's book and everything, but it does take a lot of time and it takes a lot of actually listening to people. I mean, our friendship is basically me listening to you on the phone for hours and hours and hours about your career. That's how it goes. And that's how you learn stuff.
But I would say, and during this, I know we're protracting a little bit, your ability to take what you know and your strengths of what you know and combine them are what become your differentiator. And I would say this to anyone listening who is interested in going into management on NFL teams or working in the coaching staffs like our own Sean Sayed, right, who's a great writer, legal guy. he has he's the guy that's writing these unbelievable articles on scheme. The differentiator, someone always has a differentiator. If you want to separate yourself, and if you want to potentially make the way into an organization, there has to be something that differentiates you from the fray, right? Or from the rest of the people who want to come in with mathematic backgrounds and be, a potential assistant general manager, a general manager, right? You can't just do it, with a biological mathematical background and a little bit of, you took a couple snaps as a tight end for, Wayne State or whatever. And no offense to Wayne State, because I get small schools. So
Wayne State, you would be surprised to know, not only the home of former Vikings and Broncos tight end Byron Chamberlain, but also the school against which I caught my first career touchdown.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Yeah. I love it. Well, then my point on it is, you get it. Differentiating is huge. And if you can do it and you do it, it opens up a lot of opportunities for you for sure. So,
yeah. This has been fun. We thank all of you that have come. I know that people are still kind of, working their way through the holiday, malaise and all that. We do appreciate all of you that have come. By the way, all of you that have commented on Twitter about the playoff preview, we can't wait to release that next week. Sumersports.com/subscribe. You can subscribe now. You will get our weekly newsletter, the one that leads up until the week of games, the one that comes out after the games on Monday as well, including our playoff preview. You will get those as well. YouTube.com/Sumersports for a subscription to our YouTube page as well. We'll get that as well. Anything else, Thomas, before we go?
No, I'm gonna spark a fire up here in my house, given the fact that it's a little cold here in Atlanta, and I'm gonna make some calls here and try to make some more business for Sumer if I can. If you'll let me go and do some work right now.
Absolutely. Okay, awesome. So thank you all for coming. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. For Thomas Dimitroff, for Eric Eager, this has been the Sumer Sports Show.